You think you're intelligent, perceptive, someone who can read an entire room before anyone opens their mouth. Someone who senses when the weather changes, when someone is lying, when something is wrong even if everything around seems normal. And maybe you'll even be proud of it. But what if I told you that this isn't a gift? What if I told you that this intelligence you carry with such care was built on pain? That every time you anticipated someone's mood, you were actually trying to protect yourself? That every time you read the atmosphere before entering a room, your nervous system was in survival mode, not wisdom mode? This will be unsettling. It will be unsettling because it will seem familiar. It's familiar in a way you never wanted to name. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. The content here isn't for everyone. It's for those who are willing to really look. There's a very comfortable narrative circulating out there. It appears in posts, in videos, in conversations with people who discovered a new term and felt they finally had an explanation for themselves. The narrative goes like this: you went through difficult things, and that made you smarter, more empathetic, deeper. You suffered, but you came out the other side with a capacity that ordinary people don't have, and some of that is true. But the part that nobody mentions is the price. Because there is a huge difference between developing emotional intelligence through self-awareness and developing hypersensitivity through fear. One is born from curiosity. The other is born from the need to avoid being caught off guard. One expands you. The other contracts you, even if it seems like expansion. Most people who identify with the idea of traumatic intelligence grew up in environments where getting someone's mood wrong had consequences, where a father's silence meant danger, where a mother's tone of voice needed to be decoded before any response could be made, where being invisible was safer than being seen. And then the brain did what the brain does best. It adapted. He created an internal system for reading the world. Fast, precise, almost automatic. You learned to observe micro-expressions before you even knew the term existed. You learned to calibrate your own presence according to what the environment demanded. You learned, above all, that anticipating was surviving. The problem is that you grew up. The environment changed, but the system didn't shut down. There's a name for what's happening inside you. hypervigilance. It's not some distant clinical term. It's an accurate description of what your nervous system does while you're simply trying to exist on an ordinary day. Hypervigilance is the state in which the brain remains alert even when there is no real threat. It is the danger detection system that was calibrated in an unstable environment and that now cannot distinguish real tension from imagined tension. For it, everything is given. Everything is a signal. Everything needs to be processed. When you were a child or a teenager or even an adult in a destructive relationship, your nervous system learned that relaxing was dangerous. That the moment you let your guard down was exactly the moment something bad happened. So it stopped letting its guard down and it never returned to a state of rest. This isn't mystical intuition. This is neurobiology. The limbic system, responsible for emotional and survival responses, has been trained by repeated danger to trigger before reason, before conscious thought. Before you realize you're reacting, you've already reacted. And how do you interpret people, environments, and situations? It doesn't begin in your mind. It begins in your body. In the tension that appears in your chest when someone changes their tone, in the subtle contraction when a door slams, in the instantaneous calculation you make upon entering a new place, scanning the surroundings before any deliberate thought. You didn't develop a superpower. You have developed an extremely sophisticated survival response. And for a long time, it worked. It protected. It anticipated. It avoided conflict. It avoided pain. It kept you safe in situations that weren't safe. The cost only became apparent later, when the situation changed but the system remained the same. Now let's talk about what nobody wants to admit. Not the pretty side. Not the resilience, not the depth, not the sensitivity that makes you connect with art in a way that other people can't. All of that exists, but today is not about that. Today is about tiredness. There's a type of tiredness that sleep doesn't cure. You felt it before. You sleep, you wake up, and you're still exhausted. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of discipline. It's the cost of a nervous system that worked all night even while you slept. That process, that monitored, that was on standby, because for a mind trained by trauma, rest is not automatic. Rest needs to be earned against one's own biology. And most of the time, it doesn't come. You reach the end of a day that, from the outside, seemed peaceful and you're devastated. The people around you don't understand. You didn't do anything extraordinary. You didn't have a crisis, but you spent the whole day reading, interpreting, calculating, adjusting, anticipating. Your body was in one room, but your mind was in every room at the same time. This is chronic mental exhaustion, and it's invisible. And along with the exhaustion comes overthinking. Not the mild kind, the kind people romanticize over coffee mugs. The compulsive kind. The kind that takes a sentence someone said 3 days ago and deconstructs it layer by layer until you can't sleep anymore. The kind that turns silence into a sentence, a pause into a rejection, a neutral tone of voice into a veiled threat. You don't choose to do it. It happens. And, you're exaggerating that you're probably wrong, that the person probably didn't mean anything by it. But the system doesn't accept probably. The system needs certainty. And since certainty never exists, the loop doesn't close. Never dated. And here comes the part that hurts the most to talk about. Trust. You have difficulty trusting. Not because you're cold. Not because you don't want connection. You do, deeply. But every time you get close to someone, a part of you starts working against that connection. It starts collecting data. It starts testing, sometimes without realizing it. It starts expecting disappointment as if it were inevitable. Because for your nervous system, it is. You learned at some point that the people who were supposed to be safe weren't. And that learning was so profound, so repeated, so inscribed in your body that now it applies to everyone, indiscriminately, even to people who never hurt you, even to people who genuinely want what's best for you. You unintentionally test them. You back away when they get too close. You interpret gestures of affection as traps, not because you're paranoid, but because at some point in your life, gestures of affection preceded betrayal, and your brain learned the equation. This creates an isolation that is difficult to describe, because you're not alone for lack of options. You're alone for lack of processing. For every relationship that was analyzed to death before it had a chance to live. For every connection you sabotage, because you felt it was safer to destroy before being destroyed. For every time someone got close and you were so busy trying to understand that person's intentions that you forgot to simply be with them. And the cruelest thing about all of this is the permanent state of alert. You don't know what. It's like to wake up without anxiety. You don't know what it's like to enter a room and not do an automatic scan. You don't know what it's like to have a conversation without simultaneously monitoring the tone, the expression, the body language, the words chosen, what wasn't said. You don't know what it's like to trust the present moment without already calculating the next one. You are always on alert, and that seems normal to you. It seems like who you are. It seems like your personality, but it's not his personality. It's his armor. And carrying armor all the time, even when there's no war, is the kind of thing that slowly breaks a person. No drama, no clear moment of collapse. Just a growing weariness. A lightness that becomes increasingly difficult to access. A version of yourself that existed before all this and that you can barely remember. If this makes sense to you. Leave a comment below. It doesn't have to be long. Just one word is fine. Because sometimes naming it is the first step. And leave a like too. It helps this content reach those who need it. I need to ask you a direct question. When was the last time you truly relaxed? Not the kind of relaxation that happens when you're so exhausted your body simply shuts down, but the conscious kind. The kind where you're present, light, without that background voice calculating, monitoring, anticipating. Try to remember. If you're taking a while to respond, that's already a response. There is something very specific that happens to people who carry this pattern. They can be in moments of genuine joy and still feel that something is wrong. Not because something is actually wrong, but because their nervous system wasn't programmed to accept calm without suspicion. Peace seems strange. Stability seems false. Silence seems like the anteroom to something bad. Have you ever been happy and then been afraid to be happy? You were doing well and then you started expecting the good times to end. This has a name. It's called intolerance to positive uncertainty. And it's one of the most silent and devastating effects of traumatic intelligence. Because it's not just that you suffer when things are bad. It's that you can't rest even when things are good. There is no safe place inside yourself, and the people around him don't understand that. They see someone intelligent, insightful, profound. Someone who always has the right analysis, who notices what others don't, who is never caught off guard. They admire that. Sometimes they even envy it. They don't see what's underneath. They don't see that each accurate. Reading cost you energy you didn't have. That every time you anticipated someone's mood, you were doing it to protect yourself, not out of generosity. That every time you said the right thing at the right time, it was because you learned early on that saying the wrong thing had consequences. They don't see that their depth was carved by pain, and you didn't see it either. Or you didn't want to see it, because it's much more comfortable to believe. You are this way because you're special than to admit you are this way because it was necessary. Because accepting the second option means accepting that there was something wrong with what you experienced, that you deserved more than you received, that those situations shouldn't have happened. And that acceptance hurts in a way that most people prefer to avoid forever. So the narrative continues. Traumatic intelligence becomes identity. It becomes pride. It becomes the story you tell yourself. And while this story continues, the system continues. The alert continues. The exhaustion continues. Now for the paradox. The more you refine this reading ability, the harder it becomes to live lightly. Because reading requires distance. It requires observation. It requires that a part of you is always outside, analyzing, processing, evaluating, and you can't be simultaneously outside and completely inside a moment. You can't analyze an experience and live it at the same time. So what happened? You become an observer of your own life. You're at the party, but you're watching the party. You're in the conversation, but you're monitoring the conversation. You're in the relationship, but you're evaluating the relationship. Always one step away. Always with that invisible glass between you and what's happening. And people feel it. Even without being able to name it. They feel that you are present, but not entirely. That you are close, but not completely accessible. And then they distance themselves. Or they stop trying. And you interpret this distancing as confirmation of what you always knew. That people leave. That the connection doesn't last. That it's safer not to get attached. The system feeds on itself, and it's becoming more sophisticated. More efficient. Sharper. And at the same time, you become more and more alone within it. There is a limit. It's not dramatic. It doesn't happen in a single visible moment of collapse. It's not a crisis that everyone sees. It's more subtle than that. It's the day you realize you're exhausted with yourself. That the weight is no longer from the world outside, but from the system you built to survive it. It's when you look at a completely safe situation and yet feel your body freeze. It's when someone offers you something genuine and you simply can't receive it. It's when you try to relax and realize you don't know how. Not because you forgot, but because perhaps you never learned. This is the breaking point. Not an explosion. Exhaustion, the system that saved you, is starting to cost you more than it protects you. And somewhere inside you, you know it. You already know. You probably knew it before you clicked on this video. You just needed someone to say out loud what you've been feeling in silence, because carrying around hypervigilance forever isn't resilience. It's slow illness. It's the body paying a price that was opened years ago. In situations that weren't yours to resolve, with resources you shouldn't have needed to develop. So early. And there comes a time when the body presents that bill. It can manifest as chronic anxiety, as difficulty sleeping that doesn't improve with any new habit, as relationships that begin full of possibility and end before they truly begin, as a constant feeling of disconnection, of being present in everything and belonging to nothing, as a fatigue that no doctor can explain because it's not in the body. It's in the nervous system that has never rested. It lies with the boy or girl who learned to read. Danger before learning to trust. And that child is still there, doing the work, night and day, without stopping, without anyone telling her that it is now safe to rest. I'm not going to tell you that all of this has an easily accessible positive side. I'm not going to end with a catchy phrase about transforming pain into strength. You've heard that before, and you've probably already used it as yet another way to avoid looking at what really needs attention. What I'm going to say is different. What you've developed is real. The reading ability, the depth, the sensitivity, the perception that other people don't have. That's real. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't weakness. It was a very high level of adaptation to conditions that demanded it of you. But adaptation is not destiny. The fact that you needed to develop this system doesn't mean you have to operate it in the same way forever. It doesn't mean that hypervigilance is who you are. It means that it was what you needed to be at a particular moment, in a particular context. With the resources you had available, this context has changed. And the question that remains isn't how to turn the system off, because you don't turn it off. It doesn't work that way. The question is how to slowly begin to teach your nervous system that there are environments where it can lower its volume, that there are people in front of whom the alert can gradually decrease, that existing without being in survival mode isn't naivete. It's what you were never allowed to experience. Don't romanticize trauma. It didn't make you who you are despite everything. It shaped parts of you that now need care, not admiration. But also don't discard what you've built upon it. Because there's a version of you that carries that depth without being consumed by it. That uses that perception as a choice, not as a compulsion. That can read the world without being trapped in that. Reading all the time, this version is not far off. She was simply never taught that it's safe to exist. And perhaps this is the most important work you will ever do in your life. Not productivity, not performance, not another layer of intelligence on a wound that hasn't yet healed. Simply learning once again to trust that the present moment is not a threat. That you can be here, whole, without calculating what comes next. If this video touched on something you've been carrying around unnamed, leave a comment. It could be a word, a phrase, or even just a period. Sometimes naming it publicly is the first step towards healing. And you've made it this far, leave a like. He says this kind of content matters and helps reach more people who need to hear it. And look at the video that's appearing on the screen now. It continues this conversation in a way that I think will make a lot of sense to you. Until then.